Welcome back, everybody. So in this first clip, I'm going to show you how Magweb turned out. I did the completed uh, her pants and the detail work that I didn't show in the last video. And I wanted to come back to it so that you could see how she looks in the version that will likely go into the hardcover and paperback novel. So in this video, what I'm really showing you here is just the bottom where I'm trying to ground her. So when you have a character who is in a standing position, it's helpful to show some type of ground where she's standing on, or your character can tend to look like it's floating or maybe not positioned really well. So all I'm doing is I drew a couple pencil straight lines along the bottom for guidance, and then I just go along and do rough lines that are not straight around her feet, because ground is kind of messy. And sometimes I do little bobbles to indicate pebbles or shading or things like that, to add a little bit more dimension and to ground the character a little more. You don't have to do a lot, and you're not following it all the way up, but I did give a horizon for the viewer to see that there's a floor surface or something that she's standing on. Now, this is Paulie, and I've already lined him mostly, and I'm back into the really small dimension rapidograph. This is the 3/0, and I'm doing shading. And as you can see, I've done the same thing that I did with Magweb, is I lined the uniform from the sort of cowl effect on top down to indicate that it's a darker color. And what happens when you enlarge, the larger you go, the more detail you can incorporate. And one of the things I've done on both these drawings is to go from a darker, larger pen down to a smaller for my details. And if I went up another, say, 50% into a much larger sheet, then I could have 3 or 4 pens in action on the figure to flesh out the detail work. So the larger you go, the more pens you can use, the more detail you can achieve, and the longer it will take you to draw. So a small character, say on a comic book size sheet of paper, say 11 inches tall, split into boxes or some kind of thing like that, you're really dealing with a very small scale for your drawing, and it kind of forces certain things to happen. You may end up with less available detail. So if you want more detail, then you have to up your size of paper. And when you have more paper, and I'm using small pens, it means more marks. That means it will take you more time to get through what it is that you're doing, what you're drawing. So there is a trade-off you make by using small pens. And if you notice in comics, a lot of times they're using paint techniques to fill in large areas of ink with a wash of black. So they're trying to compensate for that time construction trade-off that's happening. But if you want more detail in your art and you're doing pen and ink, this is one of the trade-offs you make for using pen and ink. If I were to be doing this and just outline like I did the original, and then go to Copic or go to color, color fills in widely. So, if you'd use a watercolor or like a Copic marker, I could fill in the costume very easily and very quickly with a wash of color. When you're doing pen and ink, you are restricted to your tools. Now, I could take the ink and turn it into a wash, and I could wash. My concern is that if I did a wash on a drawing such as this, a character, that then I have to think about the print handling of that drawing. And these drawings are going into a book, so the print handling of the book, of the type and all that kind of thing, is going to dictate to some extent what the printer can handle in their reproduction process. So I opt for simple and straightforward as much as I can, because it's likely to cost me less later. So I'm sticking with this size, knowing it should handle okay with a typical printer, typical 300 dpi scans. Although if I'm going to, say I was going into a larger offset kind of printer with using real ink, then they would be using a photography process. They would be using negatives and things like that. And the concerns would be different. But the printer that you use for whatever it is your reproduction process is can inform you what they need to keep your costs down and your quality reasonable. And so you want to look at that if you're getting ready to reproduce anything. I can take Paulie here, this drawing, I can put it on my fairly inexpensive laser printer scanner, and I can scan him in at 300 dpi, and I can reproduce him endlessly at different sizes and get most of him coming through in a reasonable way. So that's where sort of the happy medium between your print results and your art desires, what you want to do and what is feasible and not super expensive. So there's always, these are the trade-offs that you make in what you're doing with your art. I like doing pen and ink because I know I can reproduce it relatively inexpensively in pretty much many places. The more difficult your art is to reproduce, the fewer places can handle it, and the more expensive it becomes. So when you're designing whatever it is that you're designing, you have to think about things like that. Is what can I do? How much will it cost? What are my reproduction costs? How am I shopping this to somebody else if somebody else is going to do the printing for you, say a publisher or something like that? What do they not want? What do they need? What do they tell me to avoid doing? And there are things you shouldn't do that are, if you have huge fields of black on a page, that's a lot of ink going down. The sheets have to be powdered in between so the ink doesn't stick to the next page. And your costs just go, they climb that staircase into unfeasibility. So learning about your end game for your art is an important part of this. So we're coming to the end of Paulie becoming grounded, as you see in the image. And again, it's just the same process of loose kind of horizontal lines trying to show a horizon and grounding on a floor. And that's it. Enjoy.